Adam Kinzinger, you know who he is. He's the Republican representative from Illinois, who, along with Liz Cheney, is one of the two Republicans on the select committee that's investigating what happened on January 6th and who is responsible for it and how it developed and what its intent was. The intent of the January 6th riot was to overthrow the government of the United States. And that was led by Donald Trump, who, if there is any justice, if there is any truth to our documents, our founding documents, that rat-fucking son of a bitch will wind up in prison at some point, or dead, one of the two. By dead, I mean it'll take the courts too long to put Donald Trump where he belongs, under a fucking prison somewhere. I mean, as more and more of this comes out, I don't know how completely you're following this investigation, what's being revealed, but as more and more comes out, it becomes clearer and clearer that the planning stages of this attempt to overthrow the government of the United States was a couple of years in the making, maybe even longer than that. I think once Trump got elected, that's when the process began to make sure that he stayed president. I remember talking about this shortly after he got elected because he had made some offhand comment that most people thought was just a joke about how if he gets, now that he's elected president, he may stick around for 2, 3, 4 terms. You remember that. Well, it's getting crazier and crazier. Enter Adam Kinzinger, who is, like I mentioned, one of the two Republicans, Liz Cheney being the other one, sitting on this select committee investigating what went on. Kinzinger was on CNN's Wolf Blitzer Situation Room yesterday. I don't know if you saw it, but he had a chilling warning last night. And that was, he believes that this country could be on the brink of a civil war. And he didn't say it sensationalistically. He didn't say it as though he's trying to freak Wolf Blitzer out. He's making a straightforward, eyeballs on the camera statement. Now, this guy's an Air Force veteran. He added that it would be, quote, naive to think it's not possible, end quote. And this came shortly after the Christian Fascist Party, which used to be known as the Republican Party, rebuked him and the crazy bitch chairwoman of that party, Ronna McDaniel. My God, who is Mitt Romney's niece, branded the violent events of January 6th last year as, in her words, legitimate political discourse. This crazy fucker, this Ronna McDaniel, is as bad as anybody in this overthrow the government of the United States movement. She really is. Anyway, the reason, of course, that Kinzinger and Cheney were both censured by the Christian Fascist National Committee is because of their work on the House Select Committee trying to figure out all the whatabouts and wherefores and how did it happen of the attempt to overthrow the government. And even though he is one of the few Republicans who has referred to what happened on January 6th as an insurrection, he understood the anger. He said he understood the anger that comes from the people who at this point believe that the election was rigged. But he also said that the tension caused by that could spill into violence. And he made it very clear that the people who believe the 2020 election was rigged believe so because they have been totally fucking brainwashed. That's my term, not his, but that was the point he's trying to make. Kinzinger said that the rioters probably, quote, really believe what's being said about election fraud, end quote. And the video, I don't know if you saw this, but it's the only time I've heard motherfucker and motherfucker on CNN's air. I've heard a lot of strange language on CNN, certainly not Wolf Blitzer's program, The Situation Room. But what I'm talking about was the guy who was doing a selfie. He was marching to the riot. He looked like a complete jug-headed freak white man who had the sense of a fucking bedbug. But there he is, recording himself, saying every other word motherfucker or fucker, and he was going to, or he wanted to drag lawmakers, quote, through the street and cut their heads off, end quote, because this psychotic white person believed they were certifying a false electoral victory. He was on his way to the Capitol on the day on January 6th. And if you saw that piece of video, it's out there someplace. Maybe CNN, I'm sure CNN has it on their website. But this son of a bitch looks scary. He's the type of guy that if you were being attacked by 10 or 15 people and he was among them and you were armed, he would be the first one you would drop, because this guy really has the look in his eyes of a crazed psychopath. He really does. You ought to look at the video. And Kinzinger said that people like this freak fuck probably really believe what he's saying into this piece of video about the election being, quote, stolen, end quote. Kinzinger went on to say, quote, and you could multiply this guy by hundreds of thousands or millions of people because their leaders tell them the election was stolen. Look, he went on, if it was legitimately stolen, I would be ticked off too. That violates everything I swore to defend. End quote. People like this clown fuck who was at the head of this parade, who made this video, wouldn't defend anything. He wouldn't know what swearing to defend anything really meant. And these are the types of people that scare the bejesus out of me, because they are psychotic, purely and simply psychotic, ignorant, white, and psychotic. So Kinzinger said that if Trump and his allies can convince enough people that the election in 2020 was stolen from the orange vomit, Kinzinger said it's not what he called a far-off thought that, quote, someday some militia shows up somewhere to do something, and then some counter-militia shows up, and truly, at that point, that is how you end up in a civil war. I would say, he went on, that we would I never would say that we would ever have ended in that position, but I now believe it is a real possibility, and we have to be wide-eyed as we walk into this so we don't have it happen again. End quote. And then Kinzinger, much to his credit, in my opinion, took a more personal swing at these Trump nutfucks, like those who broke into the U.S. Capitol. I don't know if he was mocking their health or suggesting something important to them, but he told these crazy people that follow Trump that if it, quote, sounds cool to participate in a violent civil uprising, they should think about the 4 or 5 heart medicines they're on. Walgreens isn't going to have them available. End quote. Yeah, not just heart medicine, but half of these son of a bitches who appeared in that riot look like they're on some kind of medication. No, seriously, not necessarily psychological medicine, but for diabetes. How many of them were fat and out of shape, grunting like a bunch of fucking hogs? Anyway. And then Kinzinger went even deeper into his fears of a real war. When he was asked about it by Wolf Blitzer, Kinzinger began this way. I'm going to quote him. A year ago, I would have said no, not a chance. But I have come to realize that when we don't see each other as fellow Americans, when we begin to separate into cultural identities, when we begin to basically give up everything that we believe so we can be part of a group, and then when you have leaders that come and abuse that faithfulness of that group to violent ends, as we saw on January 6th, we would have to be naive to think it is not possible here. End quote. Full-fledged, bloody streets, violent civil war. And he went on to say he's not talking about Yankees and rebels. He's not talking about the North against the South. I mean, this shit could break out in Montana, could break out in New Jersey, could break out in Maine. It's these psychotic white people, these crazy fuckers with the guns, these knuckle draggers who have nothing to do with their useless lives. They have no life. So they play revolutionary, and they're not revolutionary. They're fascists. Anyway, he said, quote, "This is all going to be something I think in 5 or 10 years is going to be hard to explain if you're not on the side of truth," end quote. And then when asked what he'd say about Trump, if he were talking to he has a little son, newborn. Little boy's name is Christian. And he told Blitzer that he would teach his son Christian about the events of January 6th when the little kid is old enough. He's a brand new baby. I mean, he's a newborn. And that's when he said he'd probably have a hard time trying to explain it to his kid 5 or 10 years from now, unless you're telling the truth, which Kinzinger is the type of Republican I could deal with very easily. So when asked what he'd say about Trump, Wolf Blitzer said, what will you tell your son about Trump? Kinzinger replied, quote, "I'm going to tell him that Trump was the worst president the United States of America ever had. He was a liar and he was a charlatan." End quote. And then in the interview, he also suggested that this crazy bitch McDaniel, who is the chairperson of the Republican Party zombie, the fascist Christian party, he suggested that her downplaying of last year's violence as legitimate discourse had a very definite role in fomenting the tensions that are with us here a year later. And he said he was looking for a word even more intense than dangerous to describe what this bitch said. That the murderous violence that occurred on January 6th, 2021, was legitimate political discourse. That's what this crazy fucking woman said. What the bitch said, this Ronna McDaniel psychopath, what she said also prompted the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, to make a rare comment about the fascist Christians' inter-party business. And he said this on the Senate chamber floor last night. He said, quote, "Their statement didn't even make mention of the violence that day. Last week, they crossed a line, issuing a statement that censured 2 Republicans who stood up to the big lie, while also describing the insurrection of January 6 as, quote, legitimate political discourse. Their statement didn't even make mention of the violence that day," end quote, Chuck Schumer. The calm, rational way that Kinzinger responded to what Wolf Blitzer was asking him made his statement, Kinzinger's statement, even scarier, even more believable. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.